Have you ever had a conversation with someone and felt like they weren't listening? Like maybe they didn't even care about what you had to say? Not so long ago, life was a bit like that for women in Canada. They weren't allowed to vote. And if they spoke out and voiced their opinions, they could even be sent to jail. It was a time when women had more fear and less freedom, more rules and fewer rights. But 5 courageous Albertan women came together and changed it all. How, you might ask? Over a cup of tea. That's right, a cup of tea. But more on that in a minute. Almost 100 years ago, Emily Murphy, Irene Parlby, Nellie McClung, Louise McKinney, and Henrietta Muir Edwards were fed up with the way things were. Emily Murphy was the first female magistrate in Canada and wanted to be appointed to the Senate. But since she was a woman, she wasn't eligible. The law at the time said it was a position for persons, a word which somehow didn't include women. The women who would become known as the Famous Five set out to change that. But since women were strongly discouraged from getting together and talking about politics, the Famous Five set up what they called pink teas. The name was a great disguise. People assumed that they were just having dainty tea parties, but in reality, they were planning their strategy to move forward gender equality in Canada. All the planning and work that occurred during the pink teas led to the Famous Five's first petition to the Supreme Court of Canada. It was not to be that easy. Their petition was rejected. But they weren't giving up. They decided to approach the highest possible court authority at the time, the Privy Council of England. And on October 18th, 1929, an amazing thing happened. The Famous Five's petition led to the ruling that women were included as persons under law. These 5 courageous women changed the course of history in Canada and the Commonwealth and paved the way for women to be considered equal in all aspects of life. Generations later, their actions continue to inspire Canadian women to be ambitious, adventurous, and famous. Today, the Famous Five Foundation works to create a society where every voice is heard, valued, and has the power to challenge and conquer injustice.
Wow, that was terrific. Bienvenue. Welcome, everybody. Today is another Famous Five Friday, a day when women have more power. They see more opportunities, we see more opportunities, and we seize more opportunities. So thank you for sharing today with you, and hopefully you will have lots of inspiration. Well, I know you'll have lots of inspiration from the women, the female leaders, the role models that you're meeting today. Our pink tea brings together a group of panelists from New York City, from Kelowna, from panelists are from New York, from Vancouver, and from good old Calgary. That's where I'm from too. Our land acknowledgement is a commitment to a complete knowledge of Canada's history. And this includes, of course, the role that our Indigenous neighbours have played. Particularly, we wish to acknowledge the female Indigenous leaders over the years who have improved the lives of women and girls, but also to introduce you to some others. And that will certainly happen when we have more discussions, when we have our new virtual pink tea set. And today is about finding out truth. And I'm so thrilled that we have 3 amazing journalists to introduce to you. One is going to be the amazing Kathleen Petty. Kathleen grew up in Calgary, but moved to Ottawa and is one of the people who launched the CBC's news channel in 1995 or 96 or so. In fact, she was the on-air news announcer that covered the 1-hour-long broadcast for the unveiling of the Women Are Persons Monument in Olympic Plaza. So it was a truly exciting day for us to meet Canadians from across Canada. Currently, Kathleen still works for the CBC and is the executive producer for the news. So this is an outstanding reporter, but also a producer. And so now I'd like to turn over the introduction of our 2 exceptional panelists to an equally remarkable journalist, to Kathleen Petty. Thank you, Kathleen. Over to you.
It is my pleasure to provide the introduction of Susanne Craig and Kelly Cryderman for today's virtual Pink Tea. After beginning her journalism career in her hometown of Calgary, Susanne Craig joined the Globe and Mail and then moved to New York City, where she worked for the Wall Street Journal. In 2010, she joined the New York Times as a business reporter, and a few years later, in 2014, she moved to Albany to report on the state government. In 2016, she received an anonymous tip based on 3 pages of Donald Trump's 1995 tax returns. Based on this, she and her colleagues investigated the origins of his wealth, and they alleged, based on that investigation, that the vast inheritance he received from his father over the decades came as a result of dubious tax dodges and fraud. Their story was published, and 3 years later, in 2019, Susanne and her 2 other colleagues won the Pulitzer Prize for their superb investigative journalism. Last year, Susanne was awarded the Order of Canada. Our VIP guest host today is also a remarkable journalist, Kelly Cryderman. After achieving a journalism and political science degree from Carleton University and a master's degree in international history and political science from the London School of Economics, Kelly reported for the Ottawa Citizen, the Edmonton Journal, and the Calgary Herald, and now she is a reporter and columnist for the Globe and Mail, focusing mainly on Alberta. And of course, she is also a regular panelist on CBC. How lucky are we to benefit from the conversation between these 2 exceptional journalists? Over to you, Kelly.
Hi there. Can everybody see and hear me?
I can.
Excellent. Okay. I am so happy to be here to talk to Susanne Craig, who I admire and have read from afar for a very long time. And I'm so happy to have this conversation with her and with all of you and to learn from her today. And I want to get right into it because there is so much. Thank you for the great introduction, Kathleen, by the way, that covered everything. There's so much to cover with Susanne. And, I want to start out with the most basic of questions. What made you want to get into journalism? How did you start out?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for inviting me. This is a really special organization, and I think it's really important to empower women and talk to women generally about their careers and have others hear it so people can learn from it. So I just want to say thank you very much. And I got into journalism at the University of Calgary. I joined, I started out as a first-year student, and I have to admit, I joined the Gauntlet as a student newspaper, and part of it was I was living on my own, and I had to pay rent, and I thought I didn't have a lot of money, and the first thing I actually did when I was there was do some theater reviews for dinner theater. So it involved like a free meal, which was really exciting to me at the outset. And then I just fell in love with journalism. I just love learning about people and asking questions and kind of getting to the bottom of things. And that really just started my my track at the University of Calgary that, led to me getting on first as a summer student at the Calgary Herald, and then eventually now has led to me at the New York Times. But it was just a really inside of me, just a basic love of reporting and the whole process, really.
Can you tell us a bit about that first break at the Calgary Herald, and then how that journey took you to the United States?
Sure. So I just in terms of my being a student reporter at the paper. Well, I started out just doing kind of movie reviews and, the dinner theater reviews. And then I started covering student politics for them. And I had one big scoop that I really loved, and it helped me get on at the Calgary Herald, actually. It was sort of my break that ended up kind of helping me move up and get that really important internship at the Calgary Herald. And I had gotten a tip one night at Denny's at the bar on campus that the student it's like every campus, parking is this really huge issue. There's never enough parking spots, and people want parking. And as the University of Calgary Student Union president, through his position, was given what was called a rover pass. And it was a pass that allowed him to park free on campus, except for one parking lot. And it was the heated underground parking lot below McEwen Hall. For those of you who know it, it's sort of the central meeting place on campus. And it also happens to house the student union offices. And that was the only parking lot he wasn't allowed to park in. And I'd heard he was abusing it. So there's a few reporters at the Gauntlet. We got together and we decided to follow him to school one day. And lo and behold, he drives his car to the University of Calgary and he goes right into the underground parking lot where he's not allowed to be. And we go over and we ask the parking attendant who let him in. We said, well, what's up with that? He's not supposed to be parking in here. And he said, well, I'm not going to say no to somebody with a rover pass because everybody on the board of governors has them. I'm making whatever it was he was making, minimum wage. It's just not worth it to me. So he flags everybody in. So that's how the student union president was able to park underneath. And we did a big story, and the president ended up not lasting very long in the job. And then the Calgary Herald covered the story. And I went and talked to the Metro editor at the Calgary Herald and ended up getting a 6-week internship at the Calgary Herald. I did not get an internship as long as the journalism students that he'd hired, which was, I think, 3 or 4 months, but then they extended my contract once I got on.
Which is what happens in journalism when you become indispensable. So that's a great scoop. That's a great scoop.
Right, it was fun.
What took you to the United States? How did that come about?
So I was I worked at the Globe and Mail. I got the internship at the Calgary Herald, and then I got another internship at the Windsor Star, and I ended up working there for 4 years. This is something I always think, just in terms of young people, taking chances is so important. And I moved from the Windsor Star. I knew I wanted to work in Toronto. And I decided to take a 1-month internship at the Financial Post and move my life to Toronto, which, looking back, I thought was insane because I had a great job in Windsor. It was a union job. I could have stayed there for a long time. I was told I really wanted to be the auto reporter in Windsor. I was told that it would take years for me to get that. So I decided to take this 1-month internship. I just pulled up my life and went to Toronto, worked at the Financial Post. They extended my contract beyond a month. And then I went to work from the Financial Post at the Globe and Mail, which was just a huge thing in my life. It's such a great paper, and I was really excited to go there. And I loved it. And every day I would go into the cafeteria for lunch, and William Thorsell, who was the editor-in-chief of the Globe and Mail at the time, I would see him sitting in the cafeteria and he would be reading the Wall Street Journal. And it really sent a message to me. So I started reading the Wall Street Journal every day. I was like, it must be really great. I had some exposure to it because I was covering business, but I started reading it and just fell in love with it. So I applied. I ended up going from the Globe and Mail. I was their bureau chief for about a year in New York. And while I was there, I had applied to the Wall Street Journal. I'd actually applied several years before. I tried a couple times, but eventually they called me and asked me if I would come and work for them and cover Wall Street for them. So that's how I sort of made the move over with that and a lot of visa hassles. But I ended up getting on at the Wall Street Journal in New York.
And William Thorsell also, of course, hails from Alberta. He's from Edmonton, yes. The legendary editor-in-chief of the Globe and Mail. So, yeah. And from the Wall Street Journal, when did you jump to the Times?
So I worked there and I covered Wall Street for them for a decade, and then I moved to the New York Times to cover initially to cover Wall Street for them. I wasn't sure about it. It was great to cover Wall Street for the Journal, and I thought I may end up doing that for a long time. I was happy, but I wanted to make the change. There'd been a change of ownership at the Wall Street Journal with Rupert Murdoch buying it a few years before I left. And I just felt there were some changes after Rupert Murdoch bought it. And I wanted a change. So I accepted a job at the Times.
Now, you have done a lot of amazing reporting at the Times, of course, winning a Pulitzer for your reporting. And, I think about the work you've done, the Pulitzer investigations, but more recently, a story that I assume came out of that about Donald Trump's name being the discussion around taking Donald Trump's name off a state park, which is on the surface a story about a park, but is really about the financial matters of Donald Trump. And if you can take us back, how has your reporting come to be so much about the former president and his finances?
When I think about the journey, it's sort of the magic of journalism in a way. You wake up sometimes in the morning and you just don't know what story is going to come your way. And it is great because it just keeps you, I think, always on your toes, and it can really take you in a different direction. I always feel it's like getting a degree in something every few years when you can change topics. And, I went to Albany and I covered, I was the Albany bureau chief. I covered the capital of New York and state government for 2 years and got to cover Andrew Cuomo. And then I got moved down to, I was really looking forward to this. I was appointed the City Hall bureau chief in 2016, and I was going to be covering city government, which I sort of thought was like this key to New York City, just to be able to learn so much about it. And then one day it was early 2016, I got a call from the Metro editor of the New York Times. He was my boss, and he said, I know you just started down at City Hall, but the bosses at the paper would like you to come out and do one story on Donald Trump. Nobody thought he was going to be in the race long, and my boss said, we think he was going to be dropping out soon, but we'd like to have one kind of big story that looks at Donald Trump's footprint in New York and what he owns and what he doesn't own. And because of my background, I was well situated to do it, and I teamed up with a colleague to do it. And we published the story, and then Donald Trump, he kept winning. So I kept writing about him is the short of it. I had done a lot of work in 2016 on him, and I ended up doing a lot of sort of the more investigative work on him. I looked at his his planes was one, his businesses in New York, what sort of debt he had on his businesses. So I started writing a lot about his finances. It was sort of because I'd covered finances for so long, it was sort of a natural place for me to dig into. And then one day, and it's like anything, I kept getting stories, so I just kept writing on him, and I still am.
And that all stemmed out of a first profile on him, kind of like
it was that first assignment at that first profile. And then in September 2016, 7 weeks before the general election, I went to go and check my mail one day. I still check my mailbox at the New York Times, and I looked in my mail, and there was an anonymous letter from somebody, and inside of it were 3 pages of Donald Trump's 1995 tax return. And I still look back at that story. It's just how seismic it was, because most of our year had been spent trying to understand his finances. Donald Trump had promised he would release his tax returns, and it's sort of just almost a pro forma thing now for presidential candidates. It allows reporters in the country to better understand the influence as a politician are under. And he had said he was going to release them. He didn't. There's a lot of controversy about his finances and how much he is worth, and does he make money? And that envelope contained, we didn't know if it was real or not, but 3 pages. It could have been doctored, but 3 pages of his 1995 tax return, and it showed, if it was correct, that he had almost $1 billion in losses in 1995. It was seismic, if we can confirm it. And we spent 10 days working round the clock, and we did confirm it through, the tax returns are very difficult to confirm because so few people can authenticate them. But his accountant who had signed the document, who had signed the tax return along with Marla Maples, his Donald Trump's then wife, confirmed that they were the real deal. And we were able to go to print with that story. Yeah.
That's incredible. I got chills when you talk about that moment, because you knew, and I know you had to verify, but it must have been something to get documents like that you knew would have such a big impact on reporting on the candidate.
It was, and I'll tell you just a little story about how we did it, because it was, we were scrambling everything from, we need to get people to look at the signatures on it. And we ended up going down to, and we made a decision in this case just to show up in Florida where the accountant was living, where Jack Mitnick was living, and go to his home. And it turns out he lives in a gated community, and he was having a dispute with the community. So they wouldn't even let us go in to talk to him. We had to it was a colleague of mine that went, David Barstow, and he ended up getting Jack Michnick on the phone from the security hut. And Jack Michnick agreed to meet him the next day and was very reluctant to speak with us about them because Donald Trump was his client. But David got the forms out and put them on the table. And there was something that we were concerned about with the tax returns. And that was that the loss on the tax return, the loss line, it was not done in the same type font as everything else. It was really confusing to us, and it looked like it had been doctored. And at that point, Jack Michnick talked to us about that, and he said the reason it looked like that was not because it had been forged or altered. It was because the loss was so large that the select typewriter that he was using at that time, because it was 1995, he had to go in. It was all computerized, but in that instance, in order to fill in the form, he actually had to get his typewriter out to type in the loss. It was so large. And then he mailed it into the IRS. So that was able that, the confirming detail really helped us get that story to press before the election.
How did that story change the world? And did it change the world?
Oh, that's a big question. I'm never sure how things land, but that story, it was interesting. I've now just finished covering the criminal trial of Donald Trump, and I think with that story, it was important in my world. I think it was important to a lot of people. It got mentioned on the debates. That I think it ran a day or two before the debates, one of the last debate in 2016. But then a week later, talk about news cycles, especially when you're covering Donald Trump, the Access Hollywood tapes came out where he made pretty vulgar comments about his treatment of women. And then now everybody just talks about Access Hollywood. But it did, I felt for a moment that story really had a huge effect just because it was the first time anybody had actually seen his returns and the information, and it was so shocking, and that being that loss.
And then the discussion about Donald Trump's finances continues to this day. It has become, his wealth levels, where his sons get their money from. That has all become very important topics in the race that you're going to be reporting on this year. It continues to be a big issue.
And it's oddly been, I'm still covering Donald Trump and his finances 8 years in, because after that story ran, a few months later, somebody else got another 3 pages. It's an odd thing, but more pages of his tax returns. And that was in 2005, or the tax returns, the next kind of set that came out. We didn't get those, but another reporter did. And those tax returns showed that Donald Trump was actually making money, which was shocking to us that he was able to show a profit, because it's a bit of arcane tax stuff here, but because he had that loss, he would have been able to shelter $1 billion of losses going forward. So the fact he was able to show a profit was pretty remarkable. And we started to dig into why that was. And in doing so, this sent us on this 18-month odyssey that we had, where we ended up getting a lot of information about his father's business empire through a lot of sources, including some may know, and Mary Trump has come forward and said she was the source. Mary Trump gave us a lot of information, his niece, and we were able to then write a story that showed that the money that he inherited from his father was not only much larger than he had claimed. He has long claimed that he, inherited a small amount of money from his father. He got $1 million loan from his father. It turns out it was in the hundreds of millions of dollars, but that he was also able to enhance the inheritance through tax fraud. And then after that story, really quickly, we kept reporting on it, and we ended up getting all of his corporate and personal tax information for the last 20-some years, and we ran that in the series of stories on that in 2020. And I felt that's still one of the biggest stories that we've ever broken, me personally, period, but in terms of just consequence to the body of knowledge about his finances. And yeah, it was just showing that he paid not only no income tax, but how much he's made from things like The Apprentice and other things that had gone on. And that ran in 2020.
And because of your reporting and others reporting, the media and you can argue why the media has become a target for Donald Trump. Even the New York Times specifically, he has called it. How do you think there is a full understanding of the process that you go through to verify everything that you're reporting with the public at large?
I don't think there can ever be a kind of a full understanding, but I think transparency in reporting is really important, Kelly. I mean, I think it's, and the Times tries to talk about it more. I just think about, people talk about the media and they don't differentiate between, newspapers like the Globe and Mail and the New York Times and the efforts we go to from somebody who's just spreading disinformation on a blog. So we try to talk about our code of ethics, and also talk about just who the reporters are. And in stories, we try to disclose more about the sources, as much as we can. And if we don't identify a source, we have to have a really good reason that we give to our bosses. We don't allow negative blind quotes in. If we have, it's very rare. There's always a case, I guess, but we really work for transparency in that process.
And of course, you were awarded what I would say is the highest honor in journalism for your work. Do the awards like that, do they matter a lot to you?
I mean, they're important because they're a byproduct of the work, and that's how I see it. But yeah, you can't say it. It was pretty cool to win a Pulitzer, and especially to be given the Order of Canada. So they do, but I see them as sort of a byproduct of good and hard work. So
did they bring attention to journalism at a time where journalism is struggling in a lot of ways?
I think that's really important. I especially think the Order of Canada, when you see journalists getting them, you start to look at their work and why it was awarded. And I think the government of Canada, or the Governor General, in awarding, I was really surprised. I had no idea, and I thought that it did something important, which is it did put a spotlight not only on myself, but they awarded other journalists. The Order of Canada, including an incredible reporter at the Globe and Mail who did really important work on COVID. There was a really great cartoonist that got one. So I thought people were talking about journalism in a positive way, and I thought that was great.
And this, of course, the group that the Famous Five Foundation, it is about women. It's about women in politics, in business, in journalism, in positions of power. What are the pros and cons of being a woman in our business to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a hard question because I think I came through, I look at all the struggles of women just historically, and you can't help but not think about it in your job. And I sort of stand on their shoulders because I don't think I have had as many issues as so many people who came before me, and I'm very grateful about that. In fact, sometimes I think it can be, there's one, I'm going to talk at the end, I think there are some still things that we have a long way to go in terms of equality with women in certain places, but I think sometimes I see it as an advantage. And I think about a story that, and it has to do with, journalism is sort of a lot of things when we're trying to get information. A lot of times we're on the phone with people. Other times we go to people's doors. And I always remember one knock at a door that I made that, has changed my career. And I always wonder if a man had made that same approach, how it would have worked, to the point where, it was for that story that won the Pulitzer, and that it was written in 2018. And we as a group, there was two other reporters that worked with me, David Barstow and Russ Butner. They're both excellent reporters. And we had long discussions about who should go to which. We decided to go to people's doors to talk to them once we had collected a lot of information about Fred Trump and a lot of names about who we wanted to talk to. And we talked about, should part of the equation, there's more to it always, but should a woman go or should a man go? Should two of us go? How should we do it? And I was assigned to go to Mary Trump's door, Donald Trump's niece. She had been in litigation with Donald Trump in 2000 and ended up, there was a settlement, and we suspected, we didn't know what would be, there's a lot of court, the case went to discovery, so we knew there was a lot of documents, and we thought there would be a lot of financial information. We didn't have any idea really what was there. But I was assigned to go to her door. I thought it was sort of a lost cause. Whenever you get a family member, they're usually not talking, and most of the Trump family members hadn't spoken. But I was assigned to go to her door, and she initially rebuffed me. But I feel like, and I've talked to Mary about this, just the fact that I was a woman, I think really, ultimately she decided to talk to us. And I think it swayed her. And we just had a connection that a man maybe necessarily might not have. And that relationship, turned into, because we were writing the story for so long. I've known Mary for a number of years now, but I dealt with her a lot during the story, and we just had a really good rapport. And I think being a female really helped me in that instance, and has at other doors as well. It's just sort of your approach, and everybody does it differently and has a different lens on it. But I've felt that. But one area that I think all occupations, and I think journalism is one, that there's still we still have a long way to go on, is pay. I feel that women are paid less than their male counterparts. And I can do my little part in that. I'm always encouraging women in the newsroom when they feel that they're being underpaid to try and seek transparency. And we have a process now at the New York Times where we can do that. But I'm always surprised to hear, after you send somebody, you encourage them to go in and ask for more information about where they stand in terms of their salary. Inevitably somebody, and it will be a woman, comes back to me and says, yeah, I was being underpaid.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
And I think, in journalism, some of us see it as a calling, and we don't put enough emphasis on that pay issue. We're just happy to be here. And
also women, I've talked to women managers, period, at the New York Times, at women managers too. And she said that women are just less likely to come in and even ask for a raise, that men frequently come in and ask for more money, and women just don't. And I really heard that when that person told me that, and I encourage women always to go in because of that. There's no harm in doing it, and to know that men will just go in and they don't flinch at it for the most part, and women they're hesitant to do it, and they get paid less. So there's something there.
There's something there for sure.
Yeah.
And like the relationships that you've been able to build with sources, that's so important. But you also faced a lot of pushback, I'm sure, because of your reporting. We're in an era now where journalists do have to be concerned about their security and their comings and goings, and even their family members. Is that something that you've been impacted with? Is something that have you had to be worried about security given your reporting?
It's always a worry. Sometimes you just have to live your life, but you get threats. I try to focus on the positive, but you can't not pay attention to the negative. So I think, you look at, I've recently come off covering the criminal trial in downtown Manhattan for Donald Trump. And part of what I was doing, I work for the Times, and then I would do television, and often there's a security, the networks have security people that will escort you back to the courthouse just because there's so many people around and they're shouting stuff at you. And so far as nothing's happened to anybody, but it's always sort of in the back of your mind. And we just live in a different time. I mean, I didn't expect it, but Donald Trump sued me a few years ago. The case was dismissed, but he sued me for $100 million. And every time he sued the paper as well, and two of my colleagues. It was for the story that we worked with Mary Trump on, the one that ran in 2018. And every time something like that happens, you're in the news, and people are coming at you. It's just the way it is now. I think Donald Trump, in a lot of ways, has enabled that sort of behavior, and it can be really hard on the reporters covering him, and the political reporters in particular. I do more investigative work, but the people that are on the front line at the New York Times every day covering him, I don't know how they do it, because it's just a lot of incoming and a lot of hate.
Okay. I think it's time to take a question from some of our student journalists. And first, we're going to hear from Kikachi. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Kika.
I'm a print reporter. I'm not great at pronouncing names. I can spell, I can't pronounce.
Hello, my name is Kika Meme, and I'm a writer, journalist, and second-year journalism master's student at the University of British Columbia. Thank you, Susanne, for the opportunity to ask you a question today and for giving us insights into your journey as a formidable journalist. I'm particularly inspired by your work at the New York Times and by your amazing feat as a Pulitzer Prize winner. My question today is, you've labored in the journalism industry for about 30 years and have won one of the most prestigious journalism awards. Some consider winning a Pulitzer to be the peak in one's journalism career. What would you consider as the peak of your career, and how do you move forward even after passing this peak? Thank you for being such an outstanding role model and for allowing me to ask this question.
That's a hard one. I think if I think about, I kind of think of not so much peaks and valleys, but great stories, and just stories that I love to report on. And I would think of too, I really am proud of the work that I did of the financial crisis at the Wall Street Journal. It was just an incredible time to be a reporter and to cover the collapse of Lehman Brothers, which I was covering for the Journal, the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history, and just how exciting that time was in my life. And then, I'm at this point ready for put my hand up, ready for a beat change maybe. But covering Donald Trump's finances has been incredibly rewarding. I think from beginning to end, when we first got that envelope in the mail with the 1995 tax returns, through the 2018 story, and then getting all of his tax information and being the first to get it, even before that case went to the Supreme Court, we were able to get the tax information. And then now I've spent the last several years with my colleague Russ Buettner working on a book that's coming out this fall. So I think to kind of see that arc of almost a decade now of work coming to a point where we now actually have a book coming out is pretty exciting. It's an investigative narrative on the former president and presumptive nominee about his money, and I'm really excited about it. So.
And we're going to go to, I believe, our second question from a journalism student, Catherine Chu, also at UBC.
Hi, my name is Catherine, and I am a recent graduate of the Master of Journalism program at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. I have a broad range of interests in journalism, including human interest profiles, environment, science, arts and culture, social justice, sports, and history reporting. I also have a particular interest in journalism research, contributing to conversations about how we can tell more nuanced stories to better serve the needs of our inherently diverse audiences. Thank you very much, Susanne, for the opportunity to ask you a question today. I'm truly inspired by your investigative journalism career and your relentless pursuit for the truth. My question is, as an aspiring journalist in Canada, I've learned that there's a declining level of trust in Canadian news media. According to a 2022 study, only 42% of Canadians express trust. Based on your impactful and seasoned journalism career, what are ways that we can build trust in Canadian news media? Thank you so much again, Susanne. I look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Great. And, I talked about that a little bit before, but I think the New York Times thinks about this a lot. I think a lot of news organizations do, because I think sometimes there is no difference between that blogger that's out there spreading, disinformation and false information, and then news organizations that we work for that go out of their way to make sure that you've got so many sources on a story and there's layers of editors. And it's really frustrating to see that. And then also, I think, somewhat disappointing just to see, at least, I think it's true in Canada in a different way, but the tribalism that's people are divided in, where they get their news from one source and it's got a slant on it. And if they hear something else that's not either on Fox or on MSNBC, they don't want to have an open mind to it. But I think the transparency issue is so important for news organizations, that we not only engage with readers. The New York Times has opened up, it's not too new, but I've been participating in the last 6 months or so, where if I have a story, I'll go in and I'll go into the reader comments and just engage with people so they can see that there's a reporter on the other end and they're accessible and they want to talk. I recently did it. I'm covering, I'm doing a lot of reporting right now on Bobby Kennedy, who's running as an independent for president, and may actually get on the ballot in most of the 50 states. And I had a story that there was a deposition that I had reviewed where it's kind of crazy, but a worm had eaten part of his brain. And so after
You broke
that
that story.
I did, yeah. And after that story ran, I went on and spent a good day just working through the comments and both reading them and responding to ones where I thought I could add something. And also, we try to humanize the reporters that are on the other end of stories, whether it's in looking at how we present biographies of reporters, so that if people want to know our background, it's there. We also publish our code of conduct so that people can look at that. And there's just a lot of steps that we're taking to add more transparency. And in stories, if we can't talk about a source, we had another story involving Donald Trump's taxes, and we couldn't reveal who the source is, but we gave some information so people understood a little bit about where they came from. We try everything we can to give as much information as we can without revealing sources. And then I think reporters also have their own responsibility. And I think part of it for me is showing something. You can say something, but to show it and to work extra hard to get anecdotes that show behavior rather than just saying someone is lying. Show the lie in action. It just is more powerful than just stating something. And I think that kind of goes into the category of veering away from opinion. I think as so many jobs are being cut in journalism, the ones that seem to survive more often than not are opinion columnists. And we need more reporters on the front lines of this moment that we're in my view, and more investigative reporters and just more reporters. Not to say opinion doesn't have a place, but it shouldn't be at the expense of great reporting. So that's kind of the main, if I think about that question, I think about it a lot because I think it's really disappointing and I think we all suffer from it.
Do you feel like the reaction to the tribalism that we're seeing in politics around the world from the media, do you think it's enough to cut through that noise? Are media organizations doing enough?
We can always do more. I just don't have, I wish I had the answer to the question to that question, because it's become so pronounced with cable TV is huge. And then there's just all these other areas. I probably don't even know about some of them where people are getting their news. They're going onto YouTube and watching videos. There's just so many places. And people just get so embedded in their views. I try to just think about my corner of the world and how I can do a better job at making sure that our journalism is believable. It's a real problem, this tribalism. I have neighbors who only watch Fox or just watch MSNBC all day. I'm just and I don't even think those two are analogous in any way. But I think no matter what you're watching, it's incumbent on people to make sure they don't fall into that and read the New York Times and watch a bit of MSNBC and also watch Fox and also maybe read some foreign news and branch out. And if you see something you don't believe, check it out, but spend the time to check it out. I know it's hard because people have lives, but really make sure you're just getting a diverse news sources and that you're questioning everything too.
And you had you didn't know in 2016 that Donald Trump was going to be as long a story for you as it has been 8 years now.
Right.
Do you when you look at what's happening with Robert F. Kennedy's campaign, do you have any sense of whether this could be something that sticks longer than the election cycle this year as well, that you will be reporting on him in the years ahead?
I don't know. I mean, I might want to do something different, but I'm sort of just right now really focused on this year. It's just so critical for this country and I think for the world. I mean, you look at, so much concern about in Europe about what happens if Donald Trump gets in, and, so much concern in Canada for reasons everybody on this call knows. So I just sort of I'm just really focused, I guess, on this year, and then I'm going to kind of reassess. Part of it will depend if Donald Trump gets elected or not, what I do. I'm not, I sort of say I'm not a political reporter. I am in a lot of ways, but I'm an investigative reporter and I'd welcome another topic, but I'm really honored to be covering this for the New York Times and that they want me to. And I'm also doing, I do work for MSNBC and I'm honored that they give us they want to talk about our stories and that they're committed to understanding and giving us time on their air to hear about his finances. I think it's really important that we all are focused and just doing a great job reporting on all the candidates this year, which is why I wanted to do, in addition to covering Donald Trump, I'm looking into Bobby Kennedy and his run. I think I think a lot of people think he could be a really deciding factor in the election, and not a lot is known about a lot of his past and his campaign. So I'm trying to juggle both of those things right now.
And this is a really important point to bring up too. There's been a lot of discussion about how consequential this campaign this year is. To you, what is at stake? You're obviously thinking about that in your reporting. To you, what is at stake here?
I think for the U.S., it's just a really important decision in a lot of ways about an authoritarian who may get elected, and what does it look like? Even what does that day look like if he doesn't get elected, and what does that day look like if he does get elected? And if he gets elected, what will he do with the levers of power, and what will that grievance look like? And then will he ever want to leave the White House? I think these are really important questions. But I think for the U.S., it's going to be much farther reaching than that, but just how he will reshape government when he gets in. And it's the most consequential election of, for sure, my lifetime. I think most people's lifetime.
Yeah. You and I have talked a bit about, the political situation and the concern for democracy, for local news coverage, for news coverage in general. What gives you hope at this point when you look at the big picture? What gives you hope for democracy and for journalism?
I want to talk about the journalism piece of that, because I sort of was a bit crestfallen when you started, because it made me just think of how many newspapers have scaled back. And I'm very lucky to work at the New York Times, and I think that every day when I get up, it's actually an organization that's growing, but it's the exception across pretty much the world. And I just think of the Calgary Herald. When I started there, and I was a summer intern, I remember going down to City Hall and seeing just dozens of reporters covering it. And now there's just a handful of reporters at the Calgary Herald, just how teeming that newsroom was when I worked there. And I'm sad because if it doesn't, local news is important for so many reasons, just because it's important to cover local news. But I just think of all the stories that, Watergate being the biggest example. It started out as a Metro story, and there was a break-in at the Watergate. And then, like, if those two hadn't have been there, and covering that day to day, and then it blew up into something obviously huge, it changed the course of history. And I think the journalism does change the course of history, and we need reporters. And it's just sad to see the decline in this industry. What gives me hope, I see the journalism students who were on the call, that people want to still be reporters is great. I was just in the newsroom this week at the Times and met some of the interns coming up, and just how enthusiastic they are. And people still want to go into journalism. And I'm also, but somebody has to support that. And one of the things that I'm in the US with the decline of newspapers, I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but there's not-for-profits springing up all over the country to cover news. And that gives me hope that there will be at least, boots on the ground as we sort of go through all this, that there's something coming up in the absence of it. It's not necessarily newspapers, but there's incredible news organizations out there that people are willing to support, to keep communities covered, because that's where it suffers, is really the smaller communities where there's just no newspaper.
That's a really excellent point on the foundations model of the United States, in which we have not seen as much in Canada. But I am hopeful that some of that takes hold in a positive way here, to get that local coverage and that detailed coverage that you do. And I think when we talk about the television news and what people see, what people view as content, so much of that source material comes from newspapers. The original digging, the original details, and that details matter. And that's why I applaud all your work, whether you're talking about the financial crisis or Donald Trump or RFK. That is really the detailed and sweat you put into getting those details is really incredible. So, and I think is so important to the United States and to democracy.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much. I think we are just about out of time. Susanne, is there anything you would like to say before we sign off and before we hand it back to Francis?
No, I just want to say thank you very much. These conversations are so important, and I really appreciate just being invited to the table.
And as you said earlier, Susanne,
My dog.
the Famous Five were involved with the establishment of the Canadian Press Club in Canada. In fact, Nellie established a chapter in Winnipeg, and Emily Murphy established a chapter in Edmonton. And then she became the president during the First World War. And one of the things they did was railways were very generous to newspapers because they wanted the coverage of big major events. And so they gave free passage to various news organizations, various newspapers to say, come cover the opening of a World's Fair or of an election result. And they asked the newspapers to send both male and female reporters because the Canadian Women's Club had said to them, ask that this happen. And so they did. And so instead of just writing about social papers, or social issues in the paper, the female journalists started writing about all sorts of different issues that they saw and heard and whatever.
Well, you think of Nellie Bly too. It's great. I mean, what a trailblazing investigative reporter who's, I've read her stuff and just the changes that the stories she did, I mean, allowed so many of us to come, and it changed how other people came after her. She's incredible, incredible work that she did, and very unexpected because at the time she was a woman. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so hopefully more and more, both women and men will be involved in the reporting of these issues. But I think one of the benefits of the discussion today, thanks to Kelly and yourself, was the idea that you really investigate an issue before you publish it, before you take it to public. That it's not just something you've heard or something you think needs to be talked about. There's a really strict investigation that happens, isn't there?
There really is. And we, I work in the investigations unit, but we take a lot of time to make sure we get it right, especially on every story. I just happen to work on ones that are, take a lot of work just to get to the truth and get to the facts. And there's a lot of people who try to talk you out of it or tell you it's not true. And that's been another challenge, actually, of covering Donald Trump. When you call him and we're ready to go to press, and you call, in some cases, it's been the White House, they'll say that what we have isn't true, even when it is. And you're working against that. And that is incredibly difficult when you get a denial from the principal, and it's from the White House. And all the stories that we have written on his finances have borne out to be true, and we knew they were. But you're writing it often in the face of just an out-and-out denial where somebody's telling you that you're wrong.
But then, Susanne, it also takes courage to maintain that story after you have initially published it, because that's when you get the feedback. And I know Kelly has experienced that too. When she talks about a fact or gives an opinion, then all of a sudden the naysayers, and even worse, people who threaten your ability, your liability, your liberty to actually have. So how did you withstand that? You must have received some death threats and people telling you no more.
No, I have. And I think that I got one just the other day in the mail, not a death threat, but a threat, menacing note. And, I tend to just sort of put it in a spot in my head. That's just, I don't visit it very often. I mean, you have to just sort of move forward, and I tell the Times security that I've got it, but I just try not to spend a lot of time on it. Because I don't know what you can do with it. It's upsetting, but to what end is it? So I try, but it's increased since, definitely since we've been covering, and since Donald Trump became president, for everybody. New York Times reporters, we have to go through training now. If there's an active shooter in the building, what do we do? I've been through those things. We've had to fortify put cement guards outside the building in case somebody wants to ram
oh dear.
A car full of explosives with the building, so that there's more protection. There's more police presence at the New York Times and other news organizations. I mean, it's a war. It's a war on news, and it's a war on the facts.
So like librarians and others, it's journalists are playing the role of freedom fighters too. And that's certainly evident in the discussion. But unfortunately, our discussion has to come somewhat to a conclusion. And now is the time, and I know people are saying, no, keep asking questions, but we have to say thank you. And then I need to bring some famous five news, and then the two of you will return. So I would like to ask, has everybody got their cup of tea or their glass of water or something stronger to toast, first of all, Susanne, a remarkable journalist, a person who is truly a freedom fighter. I loved your term about the magic of journalism. So hopefully this will increase the appreciation of people for journalists and for people to become journalists. So if I could ask you all to raise a cup of tea or a glass of water or a mug.
Thank you.
To say thank you very much to this Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who is also an Order of Canada recipient, to Susanne Craig.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to you guys.
To Susanne.
To Susanne. And Kelly, you added much to this discussion today. Thank you for bringing your journalism expertise and your enthusiasm for this discussion. I was really excited to read your response of yes, 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 when we asked you, would you mind interviewing Susanne?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So
yeah, thank you. It was great. Great discussion. So thank you.
Yeah.
So Susanne and everyone in the audience, if you could raise your cup of tea or your glass of water in a toast to Kelly to encourage her to continue to be an outstanding journalist. To Kelly.
To Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you.
And one more toast with all of us at this stage for the three women, for the three other journalists that participated today. And that is our two master's journalism students. Isn't that exciting to get masters of journalism, being trained in the ethics? Yeah. Being trained in the ethics of journalism, the requirement for investigation, the standards. So to Kika and to Catherine, bravo, and to their wonderful professor, another journalist by the name of Candace Callison, who is the Dean of Journalism at UBC, and of course to Kathleen Petty, who did the introduction today.
Absolutely.
All right.
So to Kika, Kathleen, Catherine, and to Candace, thank you. I'm now going to ask Susanne and Kelly if they wouldn't mind just muting their video and their audio for a moment while I bring you the news of the famous five of what's happening, and then they'll come back at the end for a toast to encourage them to continue in their excellence. So first of all, I would like to just talk a minute about the famous five and Olympic Plaza. As you know, if you've been in Calgary at all, the famous five have lived in Olympic Plaza as the Women Are Persons monument. That was the democratic achievement of the famous five to enable women to serve in the Senate, but it clarified the principle of equality. The word persons would always mean men and women. As you know, Arts Commons is expanding, hooray, hooray, and the Olympic Plaza is going to be renovated. But we've just learned that there is no plans currently to return the Women Are Persons Monument, which you can see, and hopefully you've visited, when construction is over. So we're asking you to please have your say, and it says June 5th, but that's not right, to the Calgary Municipal Lands Corporation, which will be overseeing the complete renovation, and as well to your city councillor, and to let them know that it's very important that the faces and the achievements of women be honored in Calgary. I think this is the only statue in Calgary that does honor an identifiable Canadian woman. So please contact Calgary Municipal Lands Corporation or the local city councillor to stand up for the famous five. Secondly, we'd like you to visit the famous five because July 1st is coming, and these are truly nation builders. And in fact, some of us call them the mothers of the Confederation because they expanded democracy through securing the right for women to vote, the right for women to run and seek elected office, and then finally, through the person's case, the right to serve as a senator. And on July 1st, and of course, any day, please sing with great determination and appreciation our national anthem. We don't have a creed or a pledge. So when we sing our anthem, we are promising to be on guard for Canada. And so the line was changed a few years ago to "In all of us command." True patriot love, in all of us command. So that's July 1st. Come on down to celebrate with the Famous Five, Canada, and sit in Emily's chair and give them your ideas about how to build a better Canada. And that will happen both in Calgary and in Ottawa. I think we have the next slide should be of the group in Ottawa. No, it's not. But there's also a monument in Ottawa that we invite you to visit on Election Day. But what you just saw was the new logo for the Women's Professional Hockey or Soccer League. There is a hockey league now for professional women hockey players, but this is for the new soccer league. And Calgary's going to have a team, and they're called the Wild. And they've said the 5 points of their W also are in commemoration and appreciation for the achievements and contributions of the Famous Five and the 5 Indigenous nations that signed Treaty 7. So we can hardly wait for tickets to go on sale and for us to cheer for these fabulous female athletes. Next, please. The Governor General's Persons Awards are coming to Calgary on October the 18th, on the 95th anniversary of the Persons case. Nominations are still being accepted. So please nominate a woman who has significantly improved the lives of women and children in Canada. And we ask that you consider nominations from across Canada. So this is not just Calgary, this is Canada. So think who might be a good nominee from Quebec or from PEI or Newfoundland, BC. But put your nomination in by June the 30th. The next invitation that we'd like you to do is that we're going to be having on October 18th, again, the Governor General's Awards, a public celebration at noon hour, then a pink tea, and we want to establish 95 pink teas across Canada. So start thinking about who you can involve to establish a pink tea on and around October 18th. And we're asking the mayors and the premiers of all the provinces to declare October 18th Persons Day. Next, please. So our tea for this year, our pink tea for this year, the tickets have already gone on sale. It will be in the Crystal Ballroom of the Palliser Hotel, one of only 4 locations where the Famous Five met. And we have an early bird special that we're launching today for $150. And then the price will increase after September the 1st. So please join us and celebrate the 95th anniversary of the Persons case, either here in Calgary at this pink tea or at your own pink tea. And you can sponsor your own pink tea. You can organize your own pink tea. We've got a hosting kit that's both in French and English that we're happy to send to you, that is on our website, and that will give you some ideas about to continue what the Famous Five have begun. Our last virtual pink tea of the series will be on September the 13th. And that will be with Dawn Farrell, who is the president and CEO of Trans Mountain, who's just finished our major pipeline, which supposedly is the best in the world, the most sustainable, the most respectful of the environment and the culture that would penetrate it. So please join us on September the 13th for Dawn Farrell. And now I'd like to call back our 2 remarkable panelists to say thank you very much. Unfortunately, Susanne may have left, but I'm hoping Kelly might be with us, because now's the time for us.
No, I've got to run though, but thank you.
Okay, so you run, you go,
okay,
Susanne.
Great. But thank you, everybody. It was really great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
we'll be in touch. Yeah. So I would like everybody now to raise their cup to themselves, to realize that we too are leaders. We too are nation builders. And it's important that we realize that what we do and say has an effect on others and has an effect on our country. So if you would kindly raise your cup and say, to me, I'm a leader too, after I count down from 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. To me, I'm a
leader too.
Thank you. And I would add that as a leader, you're also a nation builder. And as Susanne was talking earlier about the fight for democracy in the United States, similar issues are happening here in Canada and in Alberta and in other parts too. And it's important that the women's voices be heard, that the women's concerns be heard. And that's probably up to each and every one of us to bring it forward. So again, thank you very much for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you in September. Have a wonderful summer. Keep in touch with us. Send us emails or messages. And we'll keep on building Canada. We'll keep on feeling equal to high and splendid braces. Merci. Miigwech. Thank you. And Kelly, thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Frances. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have you ever had a conversation with someone and felt like they weren't listening? Like maybe they didn't even care about what you had to say? Not so long ago, life was a bit like that for women in Canada. They weren't allowed to vote. And if they spoke out and voiced their opinions, they could even be sent to jail. It was a time when women had more fear and less freedom, more rules and fewer rights. But 5 courageous Albertan women came together and changed it all. How, you might ask? Over a cup of tea. That's right, a cup of tea. But more on that in a minute. Almost 100 years ago, Emily Murphy, Irene Parlby, Nellie McClung, Louise McKinney, and Henrietta Muir Edwards were fed up with the way things were. Emily Murphy was the first female magistrate in Canada and wanted to be appointed to the Senate. But since she was a woman, she wasn't eligible. The law at the time said it was a position for persons, a word which somehow didn't include women. The women who would become known as the Famous Five set out to change that. But since women were strongly discouraged from getting together and talking about politics, the Famous Five set up what they called pink teas. The name was a great disguise. People assumed that they were just having dainty tea parties, but in reality, they were planning their strategy to move forward gender equality in Canada. All the planning and work that occurred during the pink teas led to the Famous Five's first petition to the Supreme Court of Canada. It was not to be that easy. Their petition was rejected. But they weren't giving up. They decided to approach the highest possible court authority at the time, the Privy Council of England. And on October 18th, 1929, an amazing thing happened. The Famous Five's petition led to the ruling that women were included as persons under law. These 5 courageous women changed the course of history in Canada and the Commonwealth and paved the way for women to be considered equal in all aspects of life. Generations later, their actions continue to inspire Canadian women to be ambitious, adventurous, and famous. Today, the Famous Five Foundation works to create a society where every voice is heard, valued, and has the power to challenge and conquer injustice.